I'll be honest with you, I never thought I'd be sitting here telling strangers on the internet that my own daughter slapped me across the face. Not once, not twice, 10 times. And she did it in front of her husband, like it was some kind of show. I'm 62 years old. I've got bad knees from 30 years on factory floors at the Jeep plant here in Toledo. I've worked double shifts in winters so cold the Maumee River froze solid just to make sure my kids had heat, school clothes, and Christmas gifts under the tree. And that's the thanks I got. 10 open-handed slaps from the girl whose first crib I built in the garage out of pine 2x4s. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far a story like this travels, because sometimes it helps to know other people out there have lived through something just as bitter. It happened on a Saturday evening in late February. Snow still piled up at the end of the driveway, black with salt from the plows. I'd picked up a rotisserie chicken at Costco and a lemon meringue pie from Kroger on Monroe Street. Simple things, but they were the foods she always loved when she was little. I drove over to the split-level ranch on Cloverleaf Drive, the house I helped her and her husband buy back in 2019. I had signed as guarantor, even slid a big chunk of my retirement savings into the down payment. The papers sat in a shoebox under the seat of my Ford F-150. I never thought much about them until that night. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel tension humming in the walls. Evan, her husband, had his Dodge Charger parked out front, chrome rims still wet from the car wash. He greeted me with a smirk, phone already in his hand. He's one of those mindset entrepreneurs, always talking about passive income and landlord freedom, though I've never seen him hold a real job longer than 6 months. We sat at the table. I set down the pie. He laughed and said, "Boomer dessert." My daughter didn't defend me. She laughed too, but the laugh was sharp, not warm. I told myself to let it go. Families argue. Pride makes people careless. But then the words turn meaner. "You think this is your house, Dad?" Evan asked. My daughter crossed her arms and said, "You don't respect boundaries." Boundaries. That word stung. I'd given them a roof, paid the property taxes once when they fell behind, bought them a washer and dryer from Home Depot when the old one blew out. But now I was some intruder in the house I helped secure. I kept quiet, staring at the pie, wondering if maybe I had overstepped. Then Evan raised his phone and said, "Respect goes both ways, right?" That's when she stood up. My daughter, my baby girl who used to bring me water bottles when I mowed the lawn in July heat. She raised her hand and slapped me. Once, twice. The third one landed harder, the sound echoing off the kitchen walls. By the fifth, my cheek burned so hot I thought it might blister. Evan recorded it all, his grin widening. By the 10th, I wasn't just hurting, I was hollow. I left the pie on the counter, untouched, walked out into the freezing night. The whole way to my truck, my face throbbed. But what hurt more was the look in her eyes. Not anger, not frustration, but mockery, like I was nothing. I sat in the cab of my F-150, hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles went white. I couldn't start the engine, couldn't even move. I reached under the seat, pulled out the old shoebox I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the documents from when I set up the living trust, the warranty deed, the trustee papers, my name in black ink, stamped by the Lucas County recorder. For the first time that night, my heartbeat slowed. The humiliation was still burning on my cheek, but in my hands was something colder, heavier. Paper. Paper that weighed more than fists. Paper that said the house wasn't theirs the way they thought. I sat there a long time, engine off, snow melting in streaks across the windshield. My daughter thought she had humiliated me. Evan thought he had filmed a joke for Instagram, but they didn't realize the house they were laughing in still answered to me. And as I closed the shoebox and slid it back under the seat, I said out loud, to no one, "You have no idea what you've started." That was the night everything shifted, and what I did next is something they never saw coming. When I walked into Rudy's Donuts the next morning, the bell above the door chimed like it always does, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel at home there. The regulars were sitting by the window, same group of retired guys who read the Toledo Blade and argue about the Buckeyes, but they glanced up at me and then back down a little too quick. My cheek was still red. I could tell the story had traveled faster than the February wind. I ordered my usual black coffee, $2, and sat at the corner table, the one with the sticky laminate. My hands shook, not from age but from choice. Something was changing inside me. I pulled the shoebox out of my truck again when I got home, set it on the kitchen table, and opened it carefully. Inside were decades of my life. Old letters from Anna, my late wife, my kids' report cards from elementary school, and tucked in the back, the trust documents. I had almost forgotten about that clause. Trustee reserves the right to revoke beneficial use in the event of disrespect or violation of agreed conditions. My lawyer, Pat Caldwell, had suggested we add it back in 2019 after Mia's first flare-up, when she screamed at me for not wiring money fast enough to cover a late utility bill. Back then, I laughed it off, said, "She's young, she'll grow." Pat said, "It won't hurt to write it down." And now here I was, staring at his penmanship. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Pat's office and booked a 1:30 appointment. He answered the door himself when I got there, gray-haired, thick glasses, always smelling like pipe tobacco. He looked at me hard before I even said a word. I told him what happened. Not the humiliation, not the pie in the trash. Those details would have broken me to say out loud, but just the facts. She slapped me. He filmed it. They mocked me. 10 times. He nodded slowly, slid the papers toward him, and started reading. When he got to the clause, he raised his eyebrows. "You remember this?" he asked. I shook my head. He tapped it with his finger. "This is enforceable. You've still got every legal right as trustee. If you want, I can file a notice of revocation by Friday. But," he leaned back in his chair, "if you want something quieter, I can do that too. Something that'll hurt worse." I didn't answer right away. My gut twisted. I could almost hear Mia as a little girl, asking me to push her higher on the swings at Walbridge Park, laughing when her hair flew wild. Could I really do this to her? Strip her of the house she thought was hers? But then I saw the video again in my mind. Evan's grin, her hand raised, the sound of the slap echoing off the kitchen walls. It wasn't just disrespect. It was contempt. Pat explained the quiet option. We wouldn't just evict them. We'd sell the beneficial interest of the trust to a cash buyer. Clean, immediate, no wiggle room. "They'll think they own the house," Pat said, "but the law will prove otherwise. And when they find out, it'll be too late." I drove home with that thought rolling in my head like marbles in a drawer. Too late. The phrase wouldn't leave me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the old wooden table in my kitchen, lamp throwing yellow light against the wall, papers spread out in front of me. I thought about calling Mia, thought about saying, "I forgive you." But every time I closed my eyes, I felt the sting of her hand again. Not just one slap, 10. And I remembered Evan laughing. The man who had pawned his way through every get-rich scheme now thought humiliating me was another notch on his belt. I checked my voicemail. There it was, a message from the mortgage servicer. Payment delinquent as of February. Please contact immediately to avoid penalty. I checked the pile of mail Mia had left on the counter that night. 2 tax letters, unpaid. HOA fines stacked up for garbage cans visible. Airbnb guests in and out. They weren't just cruel. They were careless. Careless with the house. Careless with their lives. Careless with me. And here's where I know some of you will disagree. Some of you will say, family's family. You forgive. You take the hits. I've told myself that 100 times. But where is the line? Do you let your grown child keep hitting you until there's nothing left of your dignity? Or do you finally stand up, not with fists, but with something colder? I poured another coffee at midnight and stared at the trust again. This wasn't anger anymore. Anger burns fast. This was colder, steadier, like ice forming on a pond, slow but unstoppable. At dawn, I drove back to Pat's office. The streets were quiet, frost thick on the windshields. I carried the shoebox under my arm. When I set it down on his desk, my hand didn't tremble this time. "Do it," I said. "List the interest." "Sell the house." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. By the time I got back in my truck, the first investor had already called. A cash buyer out of Maumee, a woman who flipped houses for a living. She was offering nearly $290,000 if we closed within the week. My heart pounded. It was real now. I sat in the cab, engine idling, snow melting in streaks down the glass. I looked down at my hands. These same hands had once taught Mia how to hold a hammer, how to drive a nail straight. Now they were signing her future away. I told myself I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for respect, for survival, for the father I used to be before they made me into a joke. The phone buzzed again. Pat's voice came through calm but firm. "We're clear to close Tuesday at 10. Unless they file an injunction before Monday, it's done." I tightened my grip on the wheel, staring out at the frozen street, and in that moment I realized my daughter and her husband had no idea the storm that was already on its way. And when it hit, it wouldn't be loud, it would be silent, cold, final. That's where I'll stop for now, because what happened next? Well, let's just say they never saw it coming. I remember sitting at that kitchen table with Pat's words echoing in my head. "Something quieter that'll hurt worse." That phrase sank into me. It wasn't about shouting or fighting anymore. It was about permanence, and permanence only comes with paper. Tuesday morning rolled in gray and wet, snow melting into black slush at the edges of Cloverleaf Drive. I was back at Pat's office with the shoebox, and for the first time in months, I felt steady. We signed the resolution. The trust interest would be sold to a cash buyer. No eviction notices, no messy court hearings, just one stroke of ink and their kingdom would be someone else's. The buyer came quick. A woman named Janelle Ruiz, mid-40s, contractor boots, tape measure hooked to her belt. She ran Rust Belt Rehabs LLC, said she loved these old 1960s split levels because the bones were solid. She offered $287,500 cash if we closed by next Wednesday. She didn't blink when Pat laid out the terms. Clean title, taxes current, immediate possession. "I'll have my crew ready," she said, sliding the earnest money check across the table. 10 grand. The weight of it thudded heavier than any slap. I should have felt triumphant, but instead my stomach churned. That night I went home, pulled out a framed photo of Mia at 10 years old, sawdust all over her nose, holding up the birdhouse we'd built together. The nails were crooked, the paint peeling, but her smile was pure. My thumb smudged the glass as I traced her cheek. Was I really about to sell the house she thought was her home? Was I really going to make her pay for her cruelty with bricks and boards? Then I remembered the way she'd looked at me that night, not with anger, not even disappointment, but mockery, and Evan's grin behind the camera. That settled it. I wasn't taking her home. I was reclaiming mine. The next twist came faster than I expected. Pat called the very next morning. "We've got a problem," he said. My chest tightened. "HOA fines," he explained. 3 months unpaid. Trash cans left out. Airbnb guests coming through. They're threatening a lien if it isn't cured by March 15th. I drove to the house that night, parked half a block away, and just watched. I saw 2 strangers drag suitcases up the walk, tapping on their phones. Airbnb. They'd turned my family home into a revolving door for strangers. I sat there in the cab, hands gripping the steering wheel, pulse hammering. They mocked me in that kitchen, and now they were renting out the living room to tourists. The next day I went to the bank, paid the fines out of the trust account myself. Not because I wanted to save them, but because I wanted the title clean, no cracks for them to crawl through. Every dollar I spent was another nail in the coffin of their so-called ownership. But the real gut punch came a week later. I'd agreed to meet them at the house to present a cash for keys offer. My idea was to give them 30 days and $1,500 to leave peacefully, broom clean. I thought maybe it would soften the blow, maybe even keep some dignity intact. When I laid the papers on the granite island, the same countertop I helped install, Mia didn't read a single line. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You can't do this." "You wouldn't." Evan shoved the papers back across the counter, knocking my pen to the floor. That's when I slid a second sheet across, a printout of the trust clause, highlighted, and right beside it, a QR code I'd pulled from Evan's Instagram story. Time-stamped, location tagged, him filming while Mia slapped me. The evidence, their arrogance immortalized online. Evan's face went pale. He tried to reach across and grab the paper from me, but this time I was ready. The little Amazon body cam I'd slipped into my shirt pocket blinked red, recording every move, his shove, his words, my calm. Mia picked up the HOA letter I'd brought as proof of delinquency. Her hand shook as she read it. Then she saw another slip fall from Evan's pocket when he leaned forward. A pawn ticket from Great Lakes Pawn on Secor Road. Her grandmother's ring. My mother's ring. Pawned for a couple $100. Her face crumpled, eyes filling with tears. "Is this why the chase cards maxed at 820? She whispered. Evan said nothing. The kitchen air turned thick, heavy, like it could crush us all. Here's where the moral knot twists. Some of you will say I should have stopped, that I'd made my point, that selling the house was enough. But standing there, with Mia realizing her husband had pawned our family's history and lied about their debts, I couldn't pull back, not anymore. I told them, calm as winter steel, "You're not homeless, your consequences." Then I slid the one-bedroom rental brochure for River Ridge Apartments across the counter. "First month's rent, paid. You leave by April 1st, broom clean. Or you get nothing, and the sheriff watches you pack." Evan tried calling a cop buddy, but when the officers showed up, they read the papers, saw the trust clause, watched the body cam clip. One of them looked Evan dead in the eye and said, "This is civil. Looks like he's got every right." And in that moment, for the first time in months, the balance shifted. My humiliation turned into their silence. Mia's tears fell hard onto the pawn ticket in her hand. She looked at me, broken voice barely more than a whisper. "Dad, what else don't I know?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because the truth was she hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. And that's where this part ends. Because what came next? That's when everything they thought they owned was stripped away, piece by piece. Tuesday morning came with a sky the color of wet cement, heavy and low over Toledo. My hands didn't shake when I walked into the title company on Secor Road. The radiator clicked in the corner, papers stacked neat on the mahogany desk. I signed my name slow and steady on every line, assignment of beneficial interest, trustee resignation, wire instructions. With each stroke of the pen, I felt lighter. By 10:07 a.m., the deal was sealed. Janelle, the rehabber, shook my hand and said, "It's yours no more." They just don't know it yet. Outside, the cold air felt cleaner than it had in months. My humiliation was still out there on phones. Neighbors still whispered when I walked past. But inside me, something had shifted. The bruises they gave me were fading. What replaced them was purpose. Paper beats, fists. I didn't go straight home. I stopped at Great Lakes Pawn on Secor, the slip Mia had seen burned in my pocket. I asked the clerk for the item number. He slid a velvet box across the glass. Inside sat my mother's ring. Gold worn smooth, stone a little cloudy but still shining. I counted out $1,180 in 20s. Money crisp from the bank. I left with the ring heavy in my coat pocket, heavier with meaning than all the documents I'd signed that morning. That evening I went to the house. My house, though they didn't know it yet, I parked in the driveway like I had 100 times before. The charger was gone. Evan must have been out puffing his chest somewhere. Mia answered the door, eyes still swollen from crying. She didn't invite me in, but I stepped inside anyway. The place already looked different. The trash can sat overflowing by the back door. Airbnb guests had left muddy boot prints across the hardwood. My hardwood. I walked to the kitchen, set the cash for keys agreement on the counter again, then laid the ring box beside it. She stared at it, lips trembling. "Dad, you bought it back?" she whispered. I just nodded. "I won't let your grandmother's love sit in a pawn shop window." She opened the box, tears spilling down her cheeks. But before anything could soften between us, the front door slammed. Evan stormed in, leather jacket unzipped, phone still in his hand. He saw the papers on the counter and laughed. "You're bluffing, old man." I didn't answer. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the body cam fob, pressed play. The tiny speaker crackled. There was his voice from last week, sneering, shoving me, cursing, and then the slap, clear as a gunshot. Mia's breath caught in her throat. The truth filled the room. Evan lunged for the fob, but I stepped back, calm, almost detached. "Try it," I said. "The cops already saw this once. They'll see it again if they need to." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Mia whispered, "You did this. You ruined us." Her voice cracked, but it wasn't aimed at me. It was at him. At the man who pawned her grandmother's ring, maxed her credit cards, dragged her into shame, and made her raise her hand against her own father. The silence that followed cut deeper than any argument. That night, movers' trucks pulled into the driveway, headlights cutting through the frost. Janelle's crew, wearing Milwaukee tool belts and work gloves, started walking through the halls, measuring windows, snapping photos, rolling rugs. The house that had once held birthday parties and Christmas mornings was now a project, a new beginning for someone else. Mia stood by the staircase, pale and shaking. Evan barked at the movers, tried to block the door, but they showed him the stamped papers. Legal. Final. He cursed, slammed his fist against the wall I'd hung drywall on with my own hands. The echo rang hollow. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, coat collar up, watching as box after box was carried out. Each thud of packing tape was another nail in the coffin of their arrogance. Each picture taken off the wall was another reminder that everything they had bragged about stood on borrowed ground. By noon, the living room was empty, the granite island bare. The echo of strangers' footsteps filled the house where Evan once laughed, as my daughter slapped me across the face. Now it was his turn to feel the sting, only this one wouldn't fade in a week. Mia's eyes found mine one last time. "Dad," she whispered, voice raw, "is this really it?" I pulled my coat tighter, slipped the ring box back into her palm, and walked to the door. Behind me, Evan shouted, his voice cracking into panic. "You can't do this! You can't!" But the door clicked shut between us, and the sound that followed was silence. Cold, heavy, final. And that silence, that was mine. Evening crept in, the kind that settles heavy over Ohio streets, and I knew Evan would be home soon. The movers had cleared out the last of the furniture, Janelle's crew had locked up, and the house stood bare as a ribcage. I stayed behind with one chair in the kitchen, coat folded across my lap, waiting. I heard his car before I saw him, the rumble of that Charger with its vanity plates. The door slammed, boots thudded up the walk. He was laughing into his phone, bragging the way he always did. The key turned in the lock, except the lock had already been changed. He pushed harder, confused. Finally, Mia opened the door, pale and quiet. She handed him the packet the realtor left. His laughter died. He stepped into a house that was no longer his. The living room, stripped, the dining table gone, the walls bare. His voice cracked into the empty air. "What the hell is this?" He stormed from room to room, shouting her name, shouting mine, but each word just echoed off hollow walls. When he reached the kitchen, I was there. I didn't rise, didn't flinch. I only pointed to the stamped papers on the counter. He snatched them up, eyes racing across the lines he couldn't change. The rage slid off his face, replaced by something new. Fear. His hands trembled. "No," he whispered. "This isn't real." This can't be. Mia stood in the doorway, tears streaking her cheeks. She said nothing. The pawn ticket was still on the counter beside her, a quiet witness to his lies. He tried to bluster, to roar about blood and family, but every word bounced off paper heavier than fists. When the movers returned to load the last boxes, Evan tried to block the doorway. The foreman handed him the stamped deed transfer. Legal, final, unshakable. He stumbled back, helpless. That was the twist he never saw coming. He thought his fists, his arrogance, his little online audience gave him power. But in the end, it was a piece of paper he couldn't undo, signed by the same hands he once mocked. His kingdom had fallen in a single afternoon, while he was out bragging. Word spread fast. Neighbors who once watched him strut down the street now shook their heads. Friends who drank his liquor at loud parties stopped answering his calls. Even at his job, whispers followed him down the hall. The man who filmed his father being slapped had lost his home, his pride, and the respect of every pair of eyes in that town. Mia drifted into silence, too. She wore the ring I bought back, but she didn't wear that smirk anymore. Shame is heavier than gold, and she carried it every step. I left that night without a word, just walked past him, our shoulders brushing as he stood trembling in his own ruin. Outside, the air cut sharp, but for the first time in months, I felt light. The house was gone, the humiliation erased. What remained was silence, cold, steady, permanent. And that's how it ended. Not with a fight, not with me shouting into the wind, but with ink and silence. He marked me with 10 slaps. I marked him with one signature. He thought fists would write the story. He learned the pen had the last word. What I learned through it all is simple. Dignity isn't something you beg for, and it isn't something a child can take from you unless you hand it over. It lives in your choices, even the cold ones. I wish I'd remembered that sooner. Have you ever been pushed so far by family that you had to make a choice you never thought you could? I'd like to hear if you have. Share it in the comments, because stories like these don't just belong to me. And if you want to walk with me through the rest of mine, go ahead and subscribe. I'll keep telling the truth, just as it happened.